Chapter 31. So much. When Tom launched into stories of fires, gangs, and attacks, Sky realized again just how sheltered she had been on the mountain. The stories seemed surreal to her. For a few minutes she listened intently, taking in all the morbid tales, but finally her brain refused anymore. Instead, it drifted to the familiar, comforting sounds and smells that always meant safety. Tom's voice melted into the background as Sky picked up the sound of a metal cookie pan scraping against an oven rack, another batch of cookies. Trish's oven door made a slight squeak as she closed it, and Sky anticipated the taste of the warm cookies as the spatula brushed against the pan when Trisha moved the cookies to the counter. This place, where a person was safe enough to make dessert, was one far from the scenes of violence that Tom was describing. This is where Sky wanted to stay. But Tom wouldn't let her. Sky. She turned toward Tom. His brow wrinkled with concern, he walked to her and laid his hand on her shoulder. Sky winced at the flare of pain from her injury. I'm sorry. You've been through so much, but you need to be aware of what's going on, Tom said. Sky nodded and whispered, yes, of course. Tom settled himself on the arm of Sky's chair before continuing. Sky had two reactions to something grim, and they both knew it. When someone needed her, someone she could help, she was all business, approaching the problem with doctor-like precision. But when that didn't or couldn't work, she switched to avoidance mode. It wasn't something she intentionally did. It just happened, as if ignoring the problem would somehow make it all disappear. Sky had tried to avoid problems before, during the tragic events at college, the worst of her marriage, and the beginning of this disease. The strategy had not worked in the past, and it wouldn't work now. This is a lot, Tom said. Something we never saw coming. Remember everything you've already survived, and you can survive this too. I know you need a break, but there won't be one. I wish it were different, but it is what it is. You can do this. Sky gave him a little smile as she slowly twirled her bracelets. Don't worry. I'm okay. Tom nodded and continued his updating. I dug a ham radio out of the back of a closet at the station and am using it to get what news I can. I reached police or residents in several towns and even in the city. What we're all trying to find out now is if there is a government left. We still got a few working police stations. By that, I mean that someone is on the premises, anyway. But it's like here in most towns, pretty deserted. Everyone is just trying to keep the healthy people safe from the sick. We started dividing people into 3 categories: healthy, infected, and sick. Most healthy in this area are trying to help out where they can. Course, I heard from others that isn't always the case. There's some like those guys you met on the road yesterday, so we are keeping alert for those type. The sick are just that, sick. They can't help their actions but need rounded up when possible. They're spreading the disease and are a danger to others when they become enraged. Dylan agreed. Tom went on. The infected. There, we've got our hands full and then some. The infected realize they're diseased and some feel like they don't have anything to lose. Some are fine, family people trying to get along with what time they have left. But others are forming large groups, and they are bent on destruction. Homes, towns, people, whatever, they don't care. Wade's face grew red, and he let out a string of curses. Jesse's eyes rounded and he looked at Sky, who shook her head at Wade and nodded at Jesse. Wade threw an apology to Jesse and slouched down in his seat. Sky caught Tom's eye. I met some of them in Fenton. They came after me. Jesse walked over to Sky and stood beside her. Were you scared? Sky wrapped her arms around the boy. Very. Dylan glanced at Sky and reassured Jesse. That's why we stick to the hills, Jesse. The boy quickly nodded. And why no one's gonna go anywhere anymore. That's right. Both Dylan and Tom replied in unison, then shot each other a determined look. Tom continued. The infected are the most dangerous in my opinion. They can hide their symptoms of the sickness and can have a bad attitude. They sweep through the towns, making them virtual ghost towns, taking supplies and leaving behind disease, death and destruction. They burned a town entirely to the ground and left nothing standing. Some large towns are okay and have a lot of healthy people, but they still battle the infected and sick. The National Guard cordoned some towns, but they aren't holding. And one sick person can infect everyone, so being inside one can be more dangerous than being on one's own, especially since the cordons often become a magnet for criminals. Like the night I left here. Is that when everything changed here in Colton? Sky asked. Yeah, hasn't been the same since. We ran that group off, but people got spooked and headed off to relatives' homes in other areas. Some got sick. Tom lowered his head and pinched the bridge of his nose as the memories came back to him. Many had quick deaths, others I moved to the clinic at Weirstown since it was still open at the time. Tricia moved to stand by Tom, taking his hand. You know what happened to our doc? Wade asked. Seen him right before he headed to Fenton, Tom said. Someone in charge told him he was needed there, to help with the sick. Packed up his whole family. He thought it would be safer with all the government help and medicines there. I don't think it worked out so well for him though. Why? Sky asked. They're saying the infected ruled the city now, and hordes of sick walk through it day and night. Fires burn out of control and large portions of Fenton are gone. What about the Fenton hospital? Sky's throat tightened. The conditions there were so unstable. Tom shook his head. A G-flu raged through the building. No one survived. Sky leaned forward, her head sinking to her hands. Tom laid a light hand on her back and gave her a minute. Her heart ached at the terror and despair those poor people must have felt, the older lady, the young man, and the pregnant woman. She thought of Anna Lynn trying so hard to keep everyone alive. Sky hadn't held out a lot of hope for them, but she wished she'd been wrong. The good news is the healthy continue to be rescued in Fenton and some outlying towns, Tom said. Once we get enough people together, we will have a community, and then we can have some law and order around here. Tom tried to reassure them, but it would take more than a community to stop all the bad that was happening. Sky nodded as if in agreement, because she understood Tom's orderly mind needed to believe there would be an end to the chaos so he could wade through the bad he dealt with every day. Sky was beginning to see exactly what would be required. When evil takes over your existence, it isn't as simple as saying you want your life back. You have to fight for it. As her mind swirled with the daunting future she saw ahead of her, but Tom uttered the words he knew would ground her, words that cut through her churning thoughts with crystal clarity. They're finding kids, Sky, a lot of kids. They're gonna need you.